All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone signing in to this IBO Global Blueberry Report seminar. Just a few quick comments. I'm Court Brazelton, the chief editor. We have Colin Fain here, the president and CEO of Agronometrics, Sarah Elias, one of our analysts and a member of the team, as well as other members of the Agronometrics teams who are the production partner in this project. Um, Before I introduce the president of the IBO, Mario Stata, two quick comments. We have two objectives in this seminar. One, to give you just enough information to inspire you and sustain your interest, to encourage you to download the report and get the detail. And number two, to apologize in advance for the speed and brevity with which we move through some of this information so we can get to your questions. So with that, I introduce Mario Stata, president of the IBO.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Colin, Sarah, everyone. And good to be with all of you. I'm going to go through 2 or 3 minutes of a little bit of reflection of what the report and the whole environment we're in represents. So first and above all, I really want to acknowledge just Agronometrics and Kurt and all of those supporting this effort, including the sponsors and the advertisers, because it wouldn't happen without their help. A key element, obviously, of making this a reality on the many years it's taken place is based on a few words that I'm going to mention. So one, obviously, is the participation, the cooperation, the transparency, the reliability, the logic of innovation, and the improvements that have taken place. And many of you on this call are part of this effort because the report is based, obviously, on what the group headed by Colin and Kurt can access, and your disposition to be able to support the effort of generating what the report represents. Obviously, the report has a component of value, which we're always very conscious to keep in mind and make sure we try to provide through the many years, a logic of why it is relevant and why and how it can remain relevant. So the actual logic of use, the access to the information, the way information is being segmented, and a lot of the logic of not only the data, but the elements of analysis that support the data and thought process about it is obviously getting better every year. And it's really becoming a much better tool, which I personally value enormously as a user of the report. Obviously, the logic of trends is key, and because there's so much information gathered through the years, then it's not only the fact of understanding what's happening now, but actually where we were, and it's building more and more into the idea of where we're going. And it is very unique on that sense, the document in itself, but the way it's been structured now to understand and have a working tool is fundamental. On the logic of what's happening now, and I did reflect upon it on the message you're going to read, I start by mentioning that clearly there's an element today on the whole production and business environment that speaks about uncertainty and complexity. And it's not that it hasn't been there before, but it just seems to have escalated massively almost everywhere. And so to that end, then, obviously, the report provides elements to understand indeed what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, but also what we're doing right. I'm going to mention 5 things related to business, which are a reflection of this. One is, as an industry, you can perceive that the blueberry sector globally is doing something right. And you can see that by the logic of consumption, the logic of market expansion, the logic of volume growth, and the logic of how value seems to be holding. Maybe not recognizing cost elements, but actually keeping in a relatively decent shape the balance between volume increase and value, and pricing. That's one. Second, it seems that segmentation strategies are working, and you have different programs that really have shown value for the growers and for the consumers. And a reflection would be what can be done on the logic of segmentation when we think of the different countries. Third one, execution always is key, but the way things are evolving, if you don't deliver, then you really have a major issue. So the balance between supply and demand becomes even more critical. It's always been there on the logic of produce, but it is becoming more critical. And if you don't deliver and we're not consistent on that logic of balance, then we're bound to have even bigger issues. And related to this is the buildup of efficiencies and how you deal with cost. Some countries are going over 10% on inflation impact, so that's really relevant on the way you can manage or not the logic of the business. The fourth one would be, how on the logic of expansion of volume, we do deliver and develop on new markets, Brazil, India. I had a call today with Colombia, and it was interesting to see that 95% of the production stays in Colombia because the logic of the market is really sound. And so that's one example. There are many in other countries too. But we do need to develop other markets. China is becoming an exporter at times. And so that's telling us something that we really need to see. And finally, IP protection. Blueberry sector has grown based on a lot of the logic of genetics and value, and that needs to remain, and IP remains a key component. So there was the 5 elements of business. I'll mention 4 that relate particularly to environment, and I think no one or almost no one can deny that climate impact, whatever climate change, whatever you want to perceive of it on whatever parameters you want to watch, is having an impact again in many regions. Look what happened this winter in Europe and Morocco and Gibraltar, and it's been there in many places. Labor has been, remains, and will continue to become more of an issue. And so we need to work jointly to see how we develop strategies for labor access and labor availability. Water everywhere is an issue. Some places seem to have a little bit of space now to breathe. Some others are going through it. The Colorado River, look at Central Eastern Europe. You have extremes that go for the other way in Asia now. But water as a key component together with labor remain a major challenge for viability. And finally, regulations. Okay, the logic of global regulations and impact into what we do. Trade, on the logic of business remains a challenge. Blueberries are a global crop. And, IBO does, see itself as a factor that works towards fair and free trade. And it remains at core of what we are and who we are. And so that's also something that obviously we're attentive and we work on, again, as a reflection of the key components of how the industry is being affected. So thank you so much for being here with us and for your support and interest in IBO and particularly in the report. And I do look forward to your questions and comments just later on today. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Colin.
All right. Thank you very much, Mario. I'll take the baton from here. Thank you very much, Court. As we go in, I definitely want to extend my appreciation to the team behind this. These are some of the key players, the different people that have contributed content to this have been interviewed by Matt, and I don't want to skip him. He's in Australia, so the time zone didn't really work out for him to join us. But he's in our thoughts and definitely in mine as we present a lot of the content that he's helped bring together. We also very much want to thank our sponsors. We had one of the most inclusive years for sponsorship of this report. You'll see them listed on the screen, and this would not be able to exist without their contributions. So the content that you guys are seeing on the screen is in large part thanks to the names and the companies that are behind it. We're going to jump right into global pricing trends. And again, on the spirit of what Court said, this will be brief. The headline kind of takeaway from this report is obviously the massive amount of growth that we're seeing on imports. And keep in mind, these are cross-border pricings. We're not seeing internal commercialization of fruit because this is what we have visibility of. But complementing the data of the volume in imports that we're seeing increase year after year after year, with the exception of El Nino, we can see the dark red line where prices have remained amazingly stable. When we had the short volume of El Nino, the prices spiked, but still we're seeing basically the translation of this growth in volume with the stable pricing can only happen if there's more and more people and mouths and stomachs demanding this fruit. And that is one of the underlying themes of this report. We can look at comparing the monthly data. This is the same information that we just saw, just disaggregated monthly and allowing us to compare the last 4 years. The 2025 data stands out compared to the previous 2 years, if nothing else, because we're seeing a stabilization in the prices. The lows are not as low, and the highs, especially around Peru, are not as high. There's about a world full of caveats that can go into this data, not least of which will be the expectations of El Nino next year. I will let you guys dive into this in the report itself. Again, we're keeping this brief to get to the questions. We're going to continue to dive into the production survey, a feature of the report the last couple of years. We can see that the overall evaluation of the season is relatively similar, a bit improved on last year, but relatively similar. And we can start to see how this is being broken out with a more fully encompassing overlook of the different trends that are affecting production around the world. So this is the global picture. And we can see in light blue what the results were last year, and in dark blue what the results are this year. The overlying trend or the takeaway from this chart, like we can see, for example, growth in demand is seen as very positive. Whereas exchange rates and fuel costs and fertilizer costs are seen as more negative. When we sat down yesterday to kind of look over this, the kind of joke is like, oh look, innovation and new things that are coming out of the industry are seen as positive, and additional costs are seen as negative, which should surprise absolutely no one. But it's interesting that this information kind of brings this to light. Last year, we started breaking out this information by country. That is something that is also available this year. I'm not going to go into each one of the peculiarities of this information. As an example, we're using the United States. And the structure is very much the same. So we can see what the difference is from last year to this year, from the light blue to the dark blue. And then this gray dot is the comparison of what this individual country is reporting to the global average. So this should add a bit of perspective when we start looking at this information. And I hope that you guys find value in this as you flip through the report. Another insight that was brought onto the report last year was the Net Promoter Score. And this one, I've gotten a bit of feedback that it can be a bit tricky. So we'll look to explain it here. What we asked for the Net Promoter Score is how likely would respondents or people that download the report be to encourage others to be a part of this industry. And the idea behind it is to see like, okay, do people see this industry as being favorable or least favorable in the individual country? The overall response was really great. And this is a very hard number to get. The range goes from -100 to 100, and we're right around 40. But this isn't the same country by country. Some are much more optimistic and so much more inviting to this industry than others. So we can see Ecuador, Zimbabwe, Romania, a lot of the newer producing countries, Colombia, which Mario mentioned at the beginning, are much more optimistic than the average. Others, such as Serbia, Turkey, and Portugal, are less optimistic. And we encourage you to go through the report to better understand why these results might be what they are. An important takeaway is that IBO members are much more positive, considerably more positive than the average, which means that non-IBO members probably need more information from this report to understand where they sit in it. And that's what we're putting it together for. one thing that I wanted to highlight is the respondents and the people that read this information and the insights that are being brought specifically by the Net Promoter Score survey are mostly from upper management. These are the people that are bringing, that not only have an oversight of what's going on, but they're the ones that kind of have their hand on the levers of power to be able to shape it and create the industry that will be in the future. So the fact that they have this optimism and they are the ones that are encouraging people to join, I think speaks a lot about this industry and where things are headed in the future. With that, I pass the baton to Court again, who's going to lead us through industry trends.
All right. Thank you, Colin. I saw comments about some audio issues, so hopefully that's resolved. So before we get into the data that Sarah is going to share with us, she's going to give a taster of some of the developments in the statistics happening out there in the industry in the last year, year on year, and over the recent years. I want to share some of the trends that stood out in this year's report. We have consolidated the trend section in the report down to focus on 6 major trends. For those of you who have been reading this report for many years, there were times when we shared 20 plus. So we've consolidated this and have focused in on what has really stood out. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these, but I will call them out conceptually. There we go. Sorry, everyone. I just skipped through the first one. First, weather disruption is actually the norm at this point in our industry. Across the reports, we have to come to terms with the fact that we as an industry simply most of the time will not have normal and cooperative weather. And as the footprint of the crop increases, so does the impact of weather disruption. Obviously, a big standout in the discussions this year is the anticipated impact of the El Nino event, not just in Peru, but various parts of the world. And in general, that disruption has been widespread and frequent in the reports. Feeding into that disruption tied to weather and other events is another interesting trend, essentially around sustained market tightness, what we could also call scarcity without shortage. So we have sustained disruptions that can affect availability or timing in individual regions, while at the same time, we have high demand growth, increasing availability, and the development of this next level quality category that we'll address in the next. The reality is, even in periods of time when volume growth year on year increases, as we have this next level quality category driving new demand and capturing unique pricing, we're seeing trends towards tightness or markets behaving as though they are short when the supply is still growing, one of those gravity-defying trends that stood out. And we have examples and dive into this in the report. In general, the benchmark on quality is escalating significantly. One of the trends we dove into in last year's report that is holding steady is the development of this category that is really delivering a next level of quality at scale, not as a small niche, but as a substantial portion, a large minority of total available volume over a 6, 7, sometimes 8-month period of the year that is capturing different pricing dynamics and is behaving differently in SKUs and segmentation at retail. To quote one contributor, premium fruit has a floor, commoditized fruit has a cliff. For those of you who know me, I struggle sometimes with the word premium because I don't know what it means and it seems to be a moving target. But we dive into that here, and that is a present concept throughout this report that is worth understanding as there appears to be a blueberries 2.0 trend underway. A new trend that is worth attention that I will say we should anticipate will continue to gradually play out until suddenly it becomes a big part of our reality over the next 5 to 8 years is the early stages of this pendulum swing in comparative production dynamics. I'll give an example to illustrate the point. Over the last 10 years, there's been a huge opportunity for investors and for growers in newer, mainly zero and low chill growing regions where the capex is higher, but the entry to production is fast, labor costs are low, land and water costs are lower, input costs have been highly competitive, and therefore they've had a more competitive unit cost at the same time that they've often been delivering next level quality with newer genetics and capturing high pricing returns. In the eyes of many, leaving some more mature regions behind, particularly high chill regions, but also other low chill regions as well. This is starting to change. The seeds of this change are starting to show themselves. I'll give an example of Peru versus Chile. CapEx in Chile is half
in many cases for new genetics with premium fruit quality. The all input costs, with the exception of labor, are substantially lower on a per unit basis on new plantings in Chile than they are in Peru. Labor is really the last differential, and labor costs are increasing substantially as our input costs, as our capex costs in these regions that have been leading the way in unit economics competitiveness. So this is a trend worth paying attention to. This is not today, but this is starting to rear its head and show itself, and we're calling it out as something to pay attention to in the coming years. This too shall pass. In general, I think we've already touched on this. I pushed the wrong button the wrong way. There we go. Colin mentioned this. Mario mentioned this. This is a bit of everything everywhere all of the time. We have momentum in emerging supply regions, new countries producing blueberries for new and existing markets. We have new subregions in existing growing regions, growing countries in the world developing supply. Blueberries are being grown everywhere. They're being sold everywhere. They're being consumed everywhere. And the footprint of the crop continues to expand. And again, I call this the everything everywhere all of the time trend. Lastly, our industry has reached a point of scale where we are big enough as an industry to actually merit our own innovation ecosystem. So technological, biological, and genetic innovation, machinery, equipment, robotics, AI, pollination technology, new biological inputs. There's oceans of innovation out there happening in service of the blueberry industry because we present enough of an opportunity. When I was growing up as a kid, all of our machine harvesters for blueberries were glorified grape harvesters, wine grape harvesters that were retrofitted. Now there's a whole ecosystem of creative activity happening in harvesters targeting our blueberry industry. This says a lot about the opportunities available. It also says a lot about the pressure to trial and adopt innovation as growers and players around the world. So with that, I would say if you want more on any of those trends, feel free to read the report. And Sarah, I will pass the baton to you to share some of the data and statistics.
Thank you, Court. Hi, everyone. Now we'll get into the numbers inside the global statistics section, which includes plantings, production, yields, and where all of that is coming from. First, we will look at the global cultivated hectares by region. And here we see that 2025 plantings reached an estimated 300,000 hectares, which was roughly up 8% compared to 2024. And against the 143,000 hectares that we saw in 2016, plantings have more than doubled over the period of a decade. And regionally speaking, EMEA has been broadly stable. The growth between 2024 and 2025 mostly came from the Americas and Asia Pacific. Next up, we have global cultivated hectares by status. And here what we see is that an estimated 15% roughly of 2025 planted hectares are not yet in commercial production. This is down from 16.09% in 2024. In absolute terms, that's actually roughly 45,000 hectares planted, but not yet contributing mature volume. I think we're on the wrong slide here. Yes. So yeah, like I said, in absolute terms, that's roughly 45,000 hectares planted, but they're not yet contributing mature volume. Hectares that are not in production are actually growth that's planted, but not yet realized. And seeing that share fall represents consolidation and maturation of the industry, which is happening globally, but at very different scales and rates country to country. Moving on, we are at global cultivated production by use. And here the headline number is actually 2.3 million metric tons, which is the total cultivated production we saw in 2025. We see that fresh is still on its growth trajectory. Processed is actually leveling off after last year's step up. Additionally, not long ago, the split between fresh and processed was about 50-50. Now, as you can see in this chart here, an estimated 25% roughly of production went to the processed industry in 2025. These are actually largely older varieties originally planted for fresh that can no longer compete in fresh markets and are finding a second life in processing. And these rediverts are actually coming from Canada, Chile, and to a lesser extent from the Pacific Northwest in the US. And one other thing is that this growth that we're seeing in the process, which is largely not that much, is actually coming from these rediverts that were actually originally planted for the fresh category. Moving on, we have global cultivated production by region. And here we see that the Americas represents just under a half of global production, Asia Pacific about a third, and EMEA a little under a fifth. We can see the lines for the Americas and Asia Pacific moving towards converging. The Americas actually dipped in 2023 due to the El Nino effect, and while that happened, Asia Pacific kept climbing, and the gap between the two has kind of narrowed since. We also see that Asia Pacific is now running at roughly three-quarters of the Americas volume. And we talk about Asia Pacific, its growth is actually very largely a China story. The regional total masks how concentrated that expansion is. And while EMEA looks comparatively flat, that kind of understates what is happening on the ground. EMEA has actually grown substantially, but it is growing against real constraints on land, such as water, labor, and other issues. And at this scale, the chart kind of flatters the fastest movers. And set against the pace of China and Peru, genuine growth elsewhere can look like standing still if you're talking about EMEA, but that's actually not the case, like I mentioned. In short, there is sustained growth across all regions, with Asia growing aggressively and Peru sustaining the growth in Americas. But most importantly, we're seeing a near tripling of volume over a 10-year period. So next up, we have these pie charts that are the global cultivated production. There's actually a very important story. The Americas actually used to be the majority of this industry. And more than half of everything planted and everything grown back in 2020 belonged to the Americas. But within 5 years, it's fallen below 50%. And 5 years in, that's actually not a fluctuation. It's a very structural shift in where blueberries are coming from. And this actually shows us that the crop has become more globalized. So we're dealing with the very global crop now. Moving on, we look at yields, and we see that in 2025, global averages roughly reached 9,045 kgs per hectares, up from 8,900 in 2024, which was an increase of roughly 1.4%. And in a mere 5-year period, global planting and global supply has kind of diversified to an extent that no one major or macro region dominates supply or consumption. Overall, we see a rebounding in average yields, and Americas leads again, average yield-wise. And these figures are actually a representation of the broad spectrum of realities in farms around the world. All in all, we see that the globalization of blueberries is real, and it's happening now. So that's the story that is captured here. Next up, we have global cultivator production metrics. We see here that production grew about 11.2% over 2024. Of that growth, 86% came from hectares and 14% roughly from yield improvements. As of yet, the growth that we are seeing is kind of brute force growth. So it's coming mostly from hectares that are coming in. And there was a time when average yield improvements was a major driver, but at this time, the data indicates that it's the hectares. And the report actually has a deeper analysis on yield trends that we invite you all to read. Next up, we look at projections. So here we saw that by 2029, the projection puts global production at about 3.4 million tons. We see that every region kind of grows, but not evenly. Asia Pacific is the fastest, up around 60% by 2029, against roughly a third for the Americas and 40% for EMEA, which brings Asia Pacific and Americas close to level by the end of that period. One note that we would like to make here is on how we've handled Peru in this projection. We sort of intervened in the model and held Peruvian growth flat for the 2026-27 season rather than letting the growth trend run because of the expected El Nino effect that a lot of people are expecting. Industry forecasts are conflicted on this, so it's a deliberately conservative call, but we thought that this was better than ignoring the event altogether. We also kept the disrupted 2023-24 season in Peru's history rather than stripping it out as an outlier. As you all know, this was the El Nino year where production was very low for Peru. Previously, in previous models, we kept it in the model, but this time we've removed it. So this is because El Nino appears to be occurring more frequently than we used to assume, and it isn't clear whether 2023 was a one-off event or start of a very frequent recurring pattern. So those are some of the considerations that went into modeling and the mathematical modeling of the entire projections. Even with that in consideration, we are projecting over a 5-year period that an additional 1 million metric tons will be added in. And growth is expected to come from both yields and hectares. And one important point is that this model does not account for projected pricing, which could also be a significant indicator. Next up, we have global wild production by country. And there's an interesting story here. We see that wild production actually fell sharply in 2025 to roughly 125,000 tons. And that kind of erases the recovery of the last few years and puts us back near the 2020 low. The decline was actually broad-based, but Canada is still around 2/3 of global wild supply and has now declined 3 years in counting. In short, the wild industry continues to decline in volume. That's something we can say. It's facing challenges, which is reducing total availability of processed blueberries to the benefit of cultivated high bush. Pretty much every region that we can actually see in this chart is actually has seen a decrease in 2025. So that's an interesting observation to make here. Next up, we have global blueberry wild plus cultivated production. This is kind of the same picture we saw earlier, but with wild production also added in. And we see that fresh has carried growth forwards, but processed was broadly flat, as we discussed earlier. Now we arrive at the top 10. But here, in the interest of time and to really give everyone an opportunity to focus on the questions at the end of this presentation, we're going to be skipping most of the tables here, but we'll go through the first two, which are kind of the more important ones. We'll be covering plantings and production. So looking at top 10 cultivated plantings by country, the biggest standout here is actually the ascendance of Morocco relative to countries like Spain and Mexico and others. Morocco has actually overtaken Spain on planted hectares, and given how closely those two complement each other in the calendar, that's not a small thing. China, as we can see in this table, has crossed 100,000 hectares. That's twice the US numbers, and the US is comfortably second, as we can see. And these 10 countries represent around 85% of estimated global plantings. Moving on, we see top 10 cultivator production by country. Here you'll see that Peru's production now exceeds the US's, and Peru is indisputably the second largest fresh producer in the world after China, exceeding the fresh supply of the US. So that's pretty much all we'll cover in the statistics section. Now, in the interest of time, as I mentioned, we'll be skipping through these tables, but this also gives everyone an opportunity to read through these portions in the report itself. Thank you very much. Now I'll pass the baton to Court, who will cover the conclusions and recommendations section. Over to you, Court.
Thank you, Sarah. All right. If that felt like it went too fast and you didn't get enough information, it feels to me like a reason to download the report and read every single page that we have worked so hard on in service of you. And if for some reason you don't feel like doing that, when you get to the report, we would strongly advise reading the trends, reading the conclusions, and then zooming in on the macro data globally. The top 10 trends are interesting and tell good stories. And then, of course, if there's specific geographies of interest to you, please jump in there. I'm not going to hit every single one of these bullets, and nothing drives me more crazy than people who read their slides to an audience. But on this first one, I am going to repeat some things you see in front of you because I want this to sink in. For those of us who have been in this industry for a while, it is really amazing to reflect on where we've been versus where we are today. If you would have told me 10 years ago that the global plantings would more than double and that global volume would more than triple while pricing remains stable, or at least pricing trends on border crossings where we have the data available remain stable, I would have told you you're crazy. Meanwhile, fresh is the driver. It's been in the driver's seat for more than 15 years, but fresh arriving to more than 3/4 of global volume says a lot about where the driver and opportunity is in this industry today. Although pricing is stabilizing and the process industry offers incredible opportunities for mechanization, efficiency, and also creating new occasions for blueberry consumption and consumer packaged goods and direct frozen and juice and such. But just 15 years ago, this was an even split, 50-50. US imports in 2025 were bigger than the global crop in 2012. That's how much change we've seen. I think one of the standout slides presented here was Sarah showing the division of volume and supply just 5 years ago versus today, and how truly global the crop has become. We discussed in the trend section the trend of quality at scale in this increasingly bimodal market. Kevin Murphy said in an IBO meeting, I believe in 2016 in Australia, that there's 3 phases of development in a produce commodity. The first is the opportunity in pursuit of supply creation. And once there is sufficient and consistent availability, the industry moves to the opportunity of creating next level supply. And then the third trend is category segmentation and new occasions. And we see the second and third trends of those playing out simultaneously. That is also reflected in a lot of these pricing differentials, such that, again, to quote a contributor, premium fruit has a floor and commoditized fruit has a cliff. I mentioned earlier this early stage shift in comparative economic advantage as early indicators. I think this will be like so many things. New trends are overestimated in the short term, but underestimated in the long term. It is getting more and more expensive to do things in places where it used to be cheap. And it is getting more efficient to do things in places that used to be viewed as more expensive. As demographics play out and all the macroeconomic trends around the world play out, I think we should anticipate an evening out of unit economics as the leading players in every growing region in the world become more competitive at all chill levels, quality improves, and unit economics improve. Right now, this is feeding the early stages of quite the renaissance and revival in the high chill industry, something we've been talking about for some years. Importantly, scale is funding its own innovation. We have an enormous amount of innovation happening out there across mechanization, biological solutions, and all manners of technology. The leading players are the ones who get good at trialing, proving, and then rapidly adopting new innovation. And now in close, what is the outlook? What do we see ahead? Sarah and Colin and the team have done incredible work doing our very best to produce the best wrong information we can in a forecast. I think an additional 1 million metric tons over the next 4 to 5 years is credible. I think it could be lower. I think I would struggle to see it being a lot higher, speaking honestly, because it all requires land, water, labor, talent, capital, etc. And all of those things are becoming more scarce around the world. But what we're also looking at is significant and sustained growth in consumption. It's very hard to identify where the ceiling is, but showing up is no longer enough. Difficulty and opportunity are now mutually inclusive. What got us here won't get us there, as people often say. And this is really a recycling of last year's trend, as the easy days are behind us. So how we compete as individual companies or as contributors or as servants of the industry, we're all going to need to up our game because the opportunity remains very, very real. But what it's going to take to capture that opportunity is going to be at times more challenging. The good news is new consumers are discovering blueberries. Existing consumers are eating more blueberries. And if we as an industry can consistently deliver a quality product at pricing that works for them, there is nothing to prevent blueberries not just from being the #1 berry someday, with all due respect to the other berries, but also, I hope someday, the world's favorite fruit. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone in attendance here. We have time to move to questions. Colin's going to close us out. And a reminder that the IBO is here to collectively advocate and unite the industry around better information and collaborative opportunities to improve this for everyone. Let's make the pie bigger together. And thank you for your time and attention. Have a great season. Let's make it a great year, and go blueberries. So Colin, let's close us out, and then let's move to questions.
All right. So again, we've just been able to see a couple of the highlights that we're bringing together in the report. The report is close to 300 pages. So there is a lot of depth to go into, and we invite you guys to dive in. Again, I want to thank the team behind this. This is not the effort of any one person. There is a slew of people that are contributing to this, not just the ones mentioned here, but a special call out to Matt, to Sarah, to Claudio, to Violeta, who've done tremendous work bringing this all together so that we can present it today. I also want to mention Sebastian and Christian, who you guys know what you've done. Thank you very much. Pablo and Tomas, who all of the advertisers know what they've done. They're the ones that are bringing all the people together to contribute to this financially. And this is the people that are paying the bills to make this a reality. So thank you very much from the depth of my heart, and all of the love and care that we put into the report is because you guys make it available. I can't thank you enough for it. Getting right to the questions and answers, we do have a question and answer tool as a part of the Zoom call. Feel free to drop your questions there, and we will address as many as we possibly can. A lot of what we've said so far is directly in the report, so you can see it there. The questions and answers is the opportunity to really speak to us and see what other value we can offer from bringing this information together, and the insights that we personally brought or personally have as part of the exercise of producing this report. Let's see, Cor, how do you want to start with this? There's a couple that have been answered. Do we want to vocalize those, or are we gonna just jump into the ones that haven't been answered so far? You gotta unmute yourself though.
It's a great question. Looking at a lot of these, I'm going to go with one of my favorite ones. How long until Chile outproduces Peru? I would rather answer with what would it take for a country like Chile to outproduce Peru? Because Peru is unique, and there is only one Peru in the world. It is a rare event in human history or horticulture when that much land and water and labor converges with capital and capability to create a supply at scale of such a multitude of crops: blueberries, table grapes, avocados, citrus, etc. So that is hard to replicate, and there's plenty of reason to believe that of exported blueberries, Peru will continue to be 1/3 to 1/2 of supply in terms of border crossings for many years ahead. With that said, what would it take for Chile to be able to reach a next level as a major exporter and say, I'm going to pick a number, let's say double volume, go up to 200,000 metric tons of fresh exports? Fruit quality the market wants, high yields, low unit costs, driven primarily by labor. So because Chile is primarily almost 80% mid and high chill genetics are more conducive to mechanization, both in harvest and other factors. And that some form of developments around mechanized assisted harvest is likely to converge with genetics with a very long shelf life and high resistance to mechanical impact, that at some point, I think in the next 10 plus years, will create a new equalizing force in Chile that addresses one of the great constraints, which is less land and water in Chile and more labor. And so it only takes one or two factors to unlock and change an industry like ours. And I could see that happening in Chile. If that and when that happens in Chile, it would happen in a place like the Pacific Northwest as well. So I think that's a fun question. I worry less about who replaces who or beats who, and more about how do we get that product the market needs at ever greater scale to the benefit of all participants.
Might add to that climate change,
Yep.
where Chile is like a thermometer. You get all the flexibility of producing range that you could almost imagine. I mean, outside of like what Peru and Mexico and those kind of tropical regions can offer. But if things get very, very changed dramatically, you can shift production further south or higher up in Chile, which you can't really do in almost any other country in the world. Mario's got a question. He raised his hand.
Yeah, but I have
you can just speak it, Mario.
No. I have a comment actually on one of the questions. So you tell me one, Colin. The one about Georgia. I'd like to answer that. All right, from Larry. Okay, you tell me one.
Go for it. You're the president. I mean, we do this on your behalf.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah. So Larry, I'm looking at your question about Georgia. Now, you're mentioning it for a relatively young producing country like Georgia. What would you consider the most like? Wait. Yes. I don't know what happened. Wait. What would you consider the most important element of a critical commercial validation system before growers scale a new variety or production technology? I wanted to jump on this one because I've been fortunate to really have quite a bit of exchange with the Georgia Grower Association, no? With Schott and Tourniquet and the group there, and I was able to be there. And I think this one is one that you can go in circles. No, when is the right time to invest or expand? And I think from what I saw is you fundamentally do have a unique place in many ways in terms of growing environment and the capability to service some interesting markets. But I would see four things that I would suggest. One is you're working on it, but you really need to increase your genetic offer and quality. So genetic transformation, it is young, but you're already working to change to different varieties that respond to market needs and production. So that's one. You really need to accelerate that. And some of the growers there are doing it. Second, you need to build reliability, not only because of climate change, but just the conditions in Georgia. So you really need to invest on building reliability, which means technology and tunnels, and probably staying on open production is a challenge because you're also narrowing down your production windows. So you need to invest on that, just like many other regions have done it. Third one would be execution. So not only deal with reliability, but actually deliver. And you do seem to have there's a perception of reliability, but it does need to get even more consistent. So what you offer, you deliver. And so as an industry and country, I think you have all the elements, but you really need to be sure that it is there. And then obviously the last one is positioning. So what is Georgia standing for? And what is it willing to deliver and to whom? And again, if you look at your geography, you really do have a unique position. And it is a question, what you're asking probably applies to other countries that are coming in and developing capabilities, Zimbabwe, Colombia, others, no? But I hope this helps. So, need to invest and really get it done. So then you will really get to that other stage that I think you're looking at. Thank you.
I think there's a difficult question, which I think a lot of people are going to have, and we may as well address this because it's going to come up over and over again. The premium or next level category, based on larger size and better eating experience, continues to grow year over year, capturing premium returns for marketers and growers. As this category continues to grow and become more representative and common in the fresh segment, how is the premium category price gap projected to evolve or differentiate? Do you want me to take this, Cord, or do you want to take it?
I'll share a perspective. You can share your perspective. I think we'll use different data sets to answer the same question. I think it's important. Garland Ryder Jr. did an interview with Casey Cronquist about a year ago, maybe a little less, on the Business of Blueberries podcast, and I think he frames this really well. The reality is, it's why I struggle with the word premium. I think today's premium is tomorrow's expectation in so many things. If there's a product people want in the early days of its availability, it's special and gets treated as such. And over time, as it becomes widely available, the market adjusts to grow that offering. I think it's very reasonable to expect the market for large jumbo, high bricks, moderate acidity, and high firmness fruit to continue, and for ever more SKUs and consumption events to develop around that product. I would expect also new SKUs that are oriented towards snacking to leverage that sort of fruit. I think it's also important to recognize that if we're going to continue growing consumption, just better blueberries with a good shelf life available in very large pack sizes available to consumers around the world will also accelerate consumption and frequency of occasion. I think this plays into the three phases of a produce commodity where I referenced the comment of Kevin Murphy from 10 years ago at an IBO event in Australia. First phase is supply creation. The next is creation of differentiating quality. And then over time, that differentiating quality and various forms of differentiating quality and eating experience drives opportunities for category segmentation and such. Hans Linkens has a question in here where 60% of the food is consumed via retail. And in blueberries, it's much higher than 60% in most cases outside of China. It's a little more complicated. And 40% via food service. It's lower in blueberries, but what is the IBO doing about this? The IBO barely has any money, you guys. The IBO doesn't do any active promotion and development. That's what the individual country organizations oftentimes do. But there is an enormous amount of work to be done in creating food service opportunities, as there are new occasions at retail. To reference Hans Linkens right now, Hans Linkens is one of the people that was part of the project to put bananas in gas stations and sell them for $1 or €1. No one was putting bananas in gas stations. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other products and what we can do to create these occasions. You can't do it without the product. So the beauty of having new types of blueberries that either have a better shelf life or a certain eating experience or differentiating factors like size and firmness, large or medium size, but firmness and a compelling flavor profile allows the creativity to flourish around how we create more occasions. There's no reason that we can't double per capita consumption in a heavy consuming country like the US, where we still only have roughly 50% household penetration. And the same goes even more so for lesser developed markets. This is why in last year's IBO event we had in Madrid at Fruit Attraction, there was a general consensus among our panelists that it is true at this time the sky may be the limit, but that doesn't mean it's easy. There's work to be done. It will not happen to us. We as an industry have to create that outcome. What about you, Colin?
I would argue from the different data sets that we work with, we're seeing most demand growth closely correlated with regions that have better fruit quality available. So this will be like the autumn when Peru's made of fruit available. Low chill or no chill high bush is a big driver of this increase in fruit quality. So we're seeing something very similar on the Mexican side or Morocco, as it were. That said, these regions haven't been really tested by overproduction as of yet. We got really close in 2023, and then El Nino hit. And Peru has arguably been short the last 2 years since, for one reason or the next. This year could have been another potential for Peru to produce to its capacity, but it looks like, well, it doesn't look like we are getting another El Nino. Like that's already kind of sewn into the production, and that will affect what comes from Peru. We're really going to see what happens and what this the different gap between the different qualities are, what their potential is when the market is flush with high quality fruit, which we haven't gotten to yet. We've never seen it. We've never observed it. What I think will happen is as soon as consumers have the option between really good quality fruit and borderline not so great possibly quality fruit, that's where Court's quote really comes into a play, where high quality fruit has a floor and other quality fruits have a cliff. if you can get readily available high quality fruit to fit your program, why would you buy anything else? And that will be a big challenge for the industry. We're not there yet. We haven't been there yet, but that will be a story to write once we do get there, because the potential for it across the industry is there. Sorry to maybe have the analyst approach, which tends to be possibly more less rosy than the sales guys, but that's kind of my 5 cents on the subject.
There will be some speed bumps and there will be casualties on the race on this highway. There's no question. I'm going to try to hit a few with the time we have left. For Mario Flores, the trends in growth in the Americas moving more to substrate as a share of total new production. Mario, in general, and this applies not just to the Americas, but also to China and much of what's happening in EMEA. Very common now for the majority of new plantings, new projects, or replantings, sometimes even from soil into substrate, to be substrate driven and low and zero chill. A lot of that has to do with the speed at which the investment can be recovered in low and zero chill. It also has a lot to do with the level of suitability with the soil. If you eliminate the soil component, you can focus on climate and water and labor as driving factors. So it is increasingly dominant in low and zero chill. High chill substrate growing tends to be more common in areas where there are really challenging soil conditions, but good growing environments for high chill. You'll see this some in parts of Europe, tiny bit in Southern Africa. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the future in China. Much of China is still soil grown in high chill and mid chill, but there are lots of yield and quality issues there. Chile is primarily in soil. Pacific Northwest is primarily in soil because the soil is exceptional. Nothing saves money like not needing to buy pots and substrate and having exceptional soil. It's just not a privilege everyone has. The quick question from Diego Romero, the risk of low chill areas covering the full market window for places like Chile. I would say the risk to the entire high chill industry is the low and zero chill industry eating their lunch or stealing their cheese if the high chill industry doesn't adjust in a timely fashion, delivering fruit of comparable and compelling quality. The change today from 10 years ago in high chill is it's increasingly proven that there are genetics that deliver a fruit quality that is just as compelling, but at a lower capex and a lower input and operating cost, excluding labor. So the question is, will that opportunity be seized such that in the fresh industry, high chill blueberries can dominate at least a third of global supply, if not more? Long term, it could be more driven by unit cost. So I think it really comes back to the degree to which the industry innovates and seizes that opportunity. It is always harder to get a blueberry plant to do something out of cycle. And so there is nothing more competitive than a 6-year-old high chill field that is 80% single pick with exceptional fruit quality and great firmness. It is a sight to behold, and it is not something you'd ever see on an evergreen southern high bush with today's genetics. Quick question on Morocco's growth versus Turkey. What's happening there? Turkey is growing quite a bit, and it's addressed in the report. Morocco has had more years of development, and as Sarah addressed, has now surpassed both Spain, Ukraine, and others in terms of total plantings. Also, interestingly, with 60% of the hectares now has more volume than Mexico, as the Mexican industry works through a couple of challenges, climate-related, yield-related, pest and disease-related, though it is recovering quickly in Mexico. Morocco has done well and has reached scale earlier. Will they serve the same markets, or is Morocco going to eat Turkey's lunch? Turkey tends to be a pretty robust domestic market. It's interesting to see how much of Turkey's supply is actually being consumed locally. And Turkey has an easier position to serve a lot of these new and emergent markets in the Middle East, to the north of them, the Black Sea region, and as well as further afield. So I think it's as it pertains to Morocco and Egypt and Turkey, it's a yes and. As we addressed in last year's report, Morocco is also positioned to be able to pursue maritime exports to the eastern seaboard of the United States and Canada, and that has begun, although less so right now amidst tight markets in Europe and the near abroad. Colin, we are at time.
We're at time. We're going to do one more question. It's from Matias Field, looking at the impact of El Nino, because that's going to be top of mind for a lot of people. We've mentioned it a couple of times, and this is not necessarily covered on the report, but it is super relevant to the industry.
So, and I think there's probably 100 or 200 plus people in this meeting today who could answer this question, and there would be commonalities overlapping in different answers. So please, apologies if I missed something, and it's not because I disagree with you. There's a lot of all of the above. But if we look back in the last El Nino event, the biggest impact on yield and timing was with varieties that had been developed in traditional low chill environments that were more susceptible to the event and physiologically developed fewer fruit buds during traditional fruit bud differentiation and fewer flowers during traditional differentiation periods. Examples being older varieties like Biloxi, like Ventura. The yield impact was significant, and while they did eventually start to yield decent amounts, it was pushed much later, which really affected availability during the core season. Other genetics from that were newer or more adaptive to those conditions were a bit more resistant to that in terms of total fruit set, although there was a sizing impact. I would think that we should anticipate, as a percentage basis, a little less impact this time in terms of the variety mix, because Peru has continued to adjust its variety offering, but we should still see a diminished yield on a portion of the industry in more susceptible varieties. The varieties that were susceptible last time are likely to be susceptible again, and a marginal yield reduction relative to size on some of the varieties that are less susceptible. And then some of the newer varieties that are lesser known, it will be a very indicative year as to the degree to which they are or not resistant to these very warm conditions during fruit bud and flower differentiation. So
I would add to that El Nino wasn't an event that was isolated to Peru. Right? That's all very relevant
100%.
to Peru, but we also saw impacts from Chile. We saw impacts in the Pacific Northwest. We saw impacts in South Africa. We saw freezes in Zimbabwe for the first time that year.
Droughts
the rain
in
that
South
we're getting
Africa.
in Mexico right now, we're getting heat waves all across Europe. It's a huge system, and it's a global system. So yeah, El Nino will not be a small thing. Predicting it, but it will be widely felt.
hence the first trend in the report. The trend in weather is that weather is inconsistent and increasingly a problem in our industry.
Yeah. No, I think all right. On that note, thank you everybody for coming. This recording will be made available. We'll leave it. We get now the privilege and the joy of launching the report. This will also be available on the IBO website. You can use this QR code to get access to the report. You just have to, as we've done in previous years, you just have to put in your name and contact information. There's an option to be a part of next year's report. And we very much appreciate all of the contributions that allow this year's version to be available, and look forward to continuing our work with the industry to provide these insights for you, and hopefully add more clarity to what's going on in the industry and become a better and healthier industry as a consequence thereof. Should you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to us. There is contact information within the report. You can contact the IBO on their website, and that will eventually filter back to us where it's needed. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance. I believe we had upwards of 500 people actually on the call today. We will make a recording available. We're not going to pass out the slides because that information is available in the report, and we want your contact information because that's what creates the report. So should there be anything else, by all means, reach out to us, and we'll be happy to address those as they come. Any last words, Court? Mario?
Nope, I think we're over time. Thank you, everyone. Please feel free to read the report. Go ahead, Mario. Close us out.
No, thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Colin. That's always really, really interesting. I learned a lot myself. So I'm looking forward to the full version of the report. Really good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us.